Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you all for joining us tonight. So they tell a story about this Jewish immigrant. His name was Moshe Weiss. And he came to America and he wanted to become a citizen. And he didn't speak English, and he had to go before the judge, and he was very nervous. He went to his friend, he said, "What should I do? I barely speak English." He said, "The judge asks the same 5 questions to everyone who wants to become a citizen. Just memorize these answers." He says, the first question he's going to ask you is, "What is your name?" You say, "Moshe Weiss." The second question he's going to say, "How many kids do you have?" You say, 5. Then he's going to say, "How many states are there in America?" You tell him 50. Then he's going to ask you, "Who's the first president of the United States?" You say, "George Washington." And then he's going to ask you, "Are your parents alive?" You say, "Thank God, both." So for weeks he's memorizing. First question, Moshe Weiss. Second question, 5 kids, 50 states. George Washington, first president. "Are your parents alive?" "Thank God, both." The day comes, he comes before the judge, and the judge rearranged the questions. He just says, "Sir, could you tell me who is the first president of the United States?" He says, "Moshe Weiss." He says, "Can you tell me how many states are there in America?" He says, 5. He says, "How many children do you have?" He says, 50. He says, "And what's your name?" He says, "George Washington." The judge leans in and says, "Are you crazy or am I crazy?" He says, "Thank God, both." Today is January 27th, which is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. My grandparents, of blessed memory, Mendel and Henya Bosch, survived Auschwitz-Birkenau. They were liberated today. And they came to America, to Brooklyn. And my mother and her sister were born, and then, thank God, I'm here. But this country welcomed many of our family members after the Holocaust, and we are very grateful. As a matter of fact, our rabbis tell us, "Havei mispalel b'shlomo shel malchut," that a Jew should always pray for the welfare of their government. And therefore, we are instructed to be patriotic and to be strong citizens of the countries that host us, and especially a country like America, which the Lubavitcher Rebbe would always refer to America as a Medina shel Chesed, a nation built on kindness. And so it's truly an honor to have an evening tonight to celebrate the 250th year of America's independence, and to say thank you to this great country, and to talk about how to cherish and strengthen the United States of America. I want to thank once again Paul and Karen Levy for hosting this series for all of us to benefit from. Thank you, Paul and Karen. I want to thank Michael Polikoff from ACTA for being such an amazing partner with us in this. And because we're celebrating America, I think it's appropriate to begin this evening by calling upon Chani Teitelbaum to lead us in a prayer from America. God bless America. Please rise.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above, from the mountains through the prairies, through the ocean, white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
That was great. Just great. All right. My few comments have been superseded by the rabbi's introduction, but I'll read them anyway. They are very short. And thank you all for coming, and I would like to repeat the thanks to the ACTA staff, the Rabbi Shiner and his staff for making the synagogue available and the hospitality. As the rabbi said, today marks the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz by Allied forces, who found thousands of dead bodies awaiting cremation and approximately 7,000 Jews barely alive when the gates opened. It's unthinkable, but it happened. Yet in the same world, living still in the shadow of those horrors, in America today, we celebrate America's 250th anniversary. And celebrate we should. As much as we celebrate our founding charters, the Constitution came in 1787, really, I have referred to these for a long time now as the American Bible and the American Torah. We must celebrate religious liberty in America and the peace and harmony which has fostered and from which our strength as a people and a nation spring. Auschwitz taught us many things, not the least important being what hate and prejudice can drive people to do. I hope our descendants stand vigil and resist the perversions to which societies can succumb. Our history isn't pure, nor is it perfect, but the arc of history in America skews to goodness, or at least an effort to do good. And our remarkable country, which we celebrate this year, is the better for it. I'm delighted to welcome Rabbi Soloveichik and Carlos Campo to help us do that. And thank you and welcome.
Good evening. It's a joy to see all of you here tonight. We have an extraordinary program. It goes to the very heart of our nation, its past, its present, and its future. And another reason why it's particularly a joy to be here is that two of our guest speakers and my colleagues, the ACTA team, Steve McGuire, Emily J., Claire Doyle, and Tracy Pang, came in from the frozen north. They left yesterday afternoon and stumbled in late this morning. So very grateful to the speakers and to my team for being down here. Very grateful to our three distinguished speakers, and as always, to Paul and Karen Levy, who make these splendid programs possible. And to the Palm Beach Synagogue, Rabbi Shiner, in addition to creating a spiritual home for us, has had the vision that this would be the intellectual hub of Palm Beach, and so it is. And beyond, nearly 300,000 views of the videos of these programs, so we are really teaching the nation. As the president of ACTA, the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, we're engaged in a multi-year project to ensure that every undergraduate at every college and university completes a foundational requirement for the study of the story of America. As all of us celebrate America's commitment to seeking an ever more perfect union, it should be a source of patriotic pride when we consider, for example, how our founders vindicated religious freedom when it was quite a rarity in the world and sadly still is in so many places. Our record, as Paul said, is not perfect by any means, but how remarkable that our first president would write to the Touro Synagogue in August of 1790. It is now no more that toleration is spoken of as if it were the indulgence of one class of people that another enjoyed the exercise of their inherent natural rights. For happily, the government of the United States, which gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, requires only good citizens. We are indeed so very fortunate from our very roots. So we have three distinguished guests tonight to explore, from a Christian and from a Jewish perspective, America's heritage of religious freedom. Dr. Carlos Campo, the CEO of the Museum of the Bible, a dear friend of many years. It was his vision when he was the president of Regent University to strengthen the core curriculum, and he made it one of only 23 schools in the nation to earn an A from ACTA for the strength of its core curriculum. He then took the helm of Ashland University and steered the place, home of the Ashbrook Center, with wisdom and resolve through some very difficult times. The Museum of the Bible now flourishes under his leadership. Rabbi Meir Soloveichik gives deep meaning to the title Rabbi, my teacher. His books and his writings in Commentary, Azure, First Things, The Weekly Standard, are guidance not only to the house of Israel, but to the whole nation and the world beyond. Eric Cohen, who will moderate the discussion tonight. These two don't really need a moderator, but we thought, let's follow the protocol, is a well-known friend here, as he is in so many synagogues. He is the long-serving director of Tikva and a prolific author, 2 important books and articles in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, Weekly Standard, Commentary, the New Republic, First Things, and others. He brings a crucial voice to matters of bioethics and technology. In a splendid and relatively new book, Providence and Power, if you haven't read it, it really is a wonderful read. Rabbi Soloveichik quotes Manasseh ben Israel. All adore the first cause, each in his own way. He who lives according to the law of nature is pious and will have his reward. I suspect that tonight's conversation, among other topics, will bring us that wonderful understanding that underpins Jewish-Christian dialogue and human flourishing. Please welcome our 3 distinguished guests.
Can everyone hear me? Yes. Well, it's a great honor to be here in this special place for this important conversation. I think my role here tonight is mostly to look at you and say, speak and just get out of the way, and then 2 hours later we can all go home. But we should dive right in. The theme of America 250 invites civilizational self-reflection. And I think we should start by asking the most foundational question: who are we as a people? Is America a secular nation, a Judeo-Christian nation, an exceptional nation? Who is America?
First, I want to say how excited I am to be here, and thank you, Paul and Karen. It's such a joy to be here with you, and such a privilege to be invited to take part in this extraordinary annual event. America is, of course, an exceptional nation. But in answering the question, who are we and what sort of nation are we? The answer first and foremost must be that we are a covenantal nation. And in explaining what that means, let me just briefly cite something I heard from my late lamented, very much missed friend, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who once described to me, and he's written about this too, his first visit to America when he was a college-age student. Came from the UK. And he comes to Washington, D.C., and he tours. And what he was most struck by in Washington, there was no Museum of the Bible at the time. I'm sure he would have loved that.
I'm sure.
Yeah, he would have loved that. But he was most struck by the memorials, not because he had never seen memorials before. If you've been to London, you know London has a lot of memorials. But he noticed something unique about American memorials, and that was that along with the images of the individuals that were being memorialized, they also had etched into stone near these statues and images words. So you go to the Lincoln Memorial, you have not just the enthroned Lincoln of David Chester French's temple, you have Second Inaugural, you have Gettysburg Address. You go to Jefferson Memorial, you don't just have the statue of Jefferson, you have the Declaration of Independence, Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom. So Rabbi Sachs said if you go to London, the memorial for David Lloyd George has 3 words in it. David, Lloyd, and George. It says if you go to the Churchill Memorial, has 1 word, Churchill. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of Winston Churchill, but words were kind of important for him. But he doesn't have, not a single one of his speeches is etched into the stone. So why? And by the way, once I heard this from Rabbi Sachs, I noticed this everywhere. I travel all the time. If you go to Union Station in Washington, D.C., they're selling souvenirs with words on them. You'll have a mug with the Declaration of Independence. I have a tie with the Bill of Rights on it or something like that. If you're flying out of Heathrow, no one's selling a T-shirt with the Magna Carta on it. It's pictures of the king, the queen. I have a coffee mug from Kensington Palace that has on it Henry VI and Henry VIII and his 6 wives. And when you pour hot coffee into it, the 6 wives disappear. But that's what you have. So why? So what Rabbi Sachs said is, looking back on this decades later, he said that something to the effect of Britain at least was a class-based and tradition-based society. Nothing is explained because those who belong know. Those who don't know show that they don't belong. Whereas, these are Rabbi Sachs's words, whereas America is that rarest of examples of a covenant society, which was inspired by the Bible in the sense that it saw itself as organized around a set of ideas dedicated to great propositions. A covenantal society is a society where you can have both difference and belonging because you unite around a creed. A covenantal society, as in the Bible, a covenant, a brit, can bind us to past and to posterity. As Moses says, not only with you do I make this covenant, ki et asher yeshno po v'et asher eineno po imanu hayom, both with those that are here today and those that are yet to be here today. And of course, a covenant reminds us that we are obligated to constantly evaluate ourselves, whether we are hewing to the creed around which this country was founded, around which this country was covenanted. We are a covenantal society, above all. And that's why we are the only country in the West that dates its entire founding to a document with a series of ideas. No one else marks their anniversary like that. The only comparison, of course, is Israel. And that is why Rabbi Sachs, reflecting on the covenantal nature of Israel, on the covenantal nature of America, said something like, Israel and America and Israel, ancient and modern, are the 2 supreme examples of nations founded in conscious pursuit of an idea. That's what it means to be an American, to bind oneself to the American covenant.
Carlos?
Thank you. I'd like to go home now, I think. But before I do, let me also join in thanks to Paul and Karen Levy. Thank you for this extraordinary event. So grateful that we can still, in America, and may it ever be true, get together. And what is more important than ideas? Ideas shape humanity, and it shapes us as a people. And how wonderful that we've begun with such a simple question, such an easy thing to figure out. Oh my goodness, how many dissertations have been written to try to answer this question? And as the son of a Cuban immigrant and an Irish mother, my parents met on the Jack Paar television program many years ago. So a few of you, thank God, a few of you even know who Jack Paar is. You can meet me outside. But, I grew up in Miami and in New York City, where my father followed his audience, which were mainly Jewish people. Matter of fact, he said, I identify not as a Cuban, but as a Juban, because he spoke perfect Yiddish. And he said, at my wedding, he said, your mother, myself, and the priest were the only Gentiles at St. Patrick's Cathedral. So I say that in way of introduction, actually, in some ways, to the America that we live in and that I have known in my own limited perspective as an educator and the son of an immigrant. But I will also say that when you think about who we are as a nation, I think so much of this is about remembering the covenantal nature and the ideas that were the very root of who we are. At the Museum of the Bible, we have this wonderful and yet daunting task to try to tell the story this year of America's 250th as a museum, a place of inspiration. What shall we say? What shall we say? Well, we're not just any museum, we're a museum of the Bible. So we bring experts in. So Rabbi Sali is among the lecturers who will talk to us about the Jewish traditions that reflect in who we are as an American people. He was so shocked by that news, he's dropped his cigar lighter, I think is what that was. But so either that or it's his whiskey flask, which are both prominent parts.
Don't worry, I brought a spare one.
Okay. but we have tentatively entitled the exhibit, "We Hold These Truths to Be Not Self-Evident." We don't know that they are. As a matter of fact, I will tell you that I don't have to go far to my father's homeland to find a place where they are not self-evident. Those truths are not self-evident. I believe that the Bible speaks directly to why they were evident to our founders. And to me, America has drifted from those founding principles. I've just shocked the audience with that news, right? And so what has led to this drifting? We are a forgetting people. And I was talking to Rabbi Minsky on my way in, and he was talking about the very nature of forgetting and the law being given in an oral form, in its purest form, and ever since our forgetting demands that we have rabbis and others reminding us of the first principles. I would suggest that the same is true. It's one of the things that Michael spends his career doing, reminding us. And as a student of Shakespeare, I will say, I think about Hamlet, for instance. Here's Hamlet reminded by the ghost of his father. Can you imagine? Your father's ghost comes back to tell you one thing. Your uncle killed me, you must kill him, or I will have to walk in this place between heaven and hell, being purged until you accomplish this. He must return to his son and remind him. The ghost returns and says, don't forget me, because he has. We are a forgetting people. Shall I forget you, Israel? God says. Even if a mother, of course he doesn't mention a father, who might forget a child, but a mother would forget a child. Even if a mother would, I will not forget my people. But how many times does he remind us in his word to remember? To remember. I would suggest that American values have largely been forgotten by our populace, and that if Rabbi were to walk into the street and deliver that striking introduction, who would know that we are a covenantal nation? Who would know? Who would know? 79% of Americans opposed the fact that we pulled prayer and the reading of scripture from public schools. 79%. Today, what would that percentage be? So we are still defining ourselves as a nation. I would suggest we are a nation constructed by laws that allow us to have faith, but I think we live it out in a very secular fashion today.
So if America is indeed a covenantal people, this idea only makes sense. What brings it to life is the Bible. Right? It's the biblical vision that infused the American soul early in our founding. It's biblical ideas that have shaped the American character and the American project. And yet, as Carlos just suggested, it's precisely the Bible that we've written out of American civic formation, written out of our schools. So, Rabbi Soloveichik, what would it mean to put the Bible back at the center of American culture and American civic life?
This is one of the most important questions facing us today, because we do truly live in many ways in a post-biblical age. I gave a sermon here in this sanctuary just a couple weeks ago, where I mentioned how in 2023, on an episode of Jeopardy, the clue was, this biblical book contains the verse, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." And all three contestants just stared blankly and were not able to answer the question. I saw just recently that a not insignificant percentage of young people in America think that Joan of Arc was Noah's wife. But again, I think what that highlights is actually that we've not just forgotten the Bible, we've forgotten the entire heritage of the West, to build on what Carlos said. Andrew Roberts concludes his biography of Churchill by noting that there's a large amount of school children in the UK that think that Winston Churchill is a fictional character and Sherlock Holmes is real. And so we've forgotten much of our heritage. And here I think the way forward lies, first and foremost, with an attempt to impact our culture. Politics is extremely important, but politics is not enough. It's not enough. We have to make our heritage in so many different ways part of our culture again. I happen to be on the faith council of a company called the Wonder Project. The Wonder Project has produced the streaming show on Amazon, House of David, if you've seen it. I won't tell you if this David guy makes it in this. No spoilers in the show, but it's been watched, I think, 60 million times, I think. Now, how much of that is in America, how much beyond, I don't know. But the demand is there. And that's true not just about biblical stories, but also about stories that relate to our own heritage as Americans. There's a movie that they're releasing right before America's 250th called Young Washington, about how the French and Indian War formed George Washington. Suffice it to say, these are not the movies that Hollywood is concerned with making. And so we have to think about how we educate the next generation about our heritage. It begins with culture, but it also falls to every single one of us as Americans. Soloveichik family takes our children to American history sites, the biblical part of the story that they've already receiving in their schools. That they don't need us to teach them, they'll get it from us too. But we will take them to places in America that reflect our covenantal character. And we will take them to Independence Hall. We'll take them to Fort Ticonderoga, Valley Forge. We've been to Gettysburg. I took my son on a Segway tour of Gettysburg, and I hit a tree and flew off it and skinned my arm. So now I can say I've been wounded at Gettysburg. The world will little remember what I said there, but it can never forget what I did there. And we do so because we have, as Paul beautifully described, as the Rabbi beautifully described, we have a sense of debt and gratitude to our country. But at the heart of a covenantal culture is that it is the obligation of one generation to communicate it to the next. Covenantal cultures in the Bible have lost their covenantal character and have been renewed. King Josiah renewed Israel's covenantal culture after it had been forgotten under King Manasseh for over 50 years. But it falls to leaders, it falls to families, but cultures can be restored.
So, Carlos, I think it's fair to say that the slogan, "A more biblical America," would make Jews uneasy for a very long time in American history. And so, if the irony, of course, being that the Hebraic covenant is the text we're talking about. So, how do you think with us as Jews about putting the Bible at the center of American renewal? Including those who are uneasy by this idea, even if they understand the argument?
Well, I think it's fair to feel uneasy about it. Our founders felt uneasy about it as well, didn't they? I mean, they were very careful about instituting this dual protection, right? About establishing, right? We'll never establish religion, but we'll also be a place of freedom where religion can be expressed freely. You know, I think that there is a real and a propagandistic sort of view about evangelical Christianity and how they view Judaism overall. Another thing that Rabbi Minsky and I were talking about. We don't have a great history, do we, of coercive actions in terms of faith. You see, it's all about the intent. See, we love our brothers and sisters so much that we don't want them to fall into hell, and so to save you from hell, we'll simply torture you into Christianity. It's not a wonderful past, is it? And it's so deeply dark, and I would suggest that the Enlightenment brings with it values that cohere with fundamental biblical values in a way that would never allow that to occur again. And the words are out of my mouth, and I realize, of course they can. And they will, as long as we don't hold one another accountable and say, if it's more biblical in ways that reflect what's truly at the heart of Scripture, and that is these ideas that justice and peace and humanity, I will just reading about a lecture, a speech that FDR gave. Can you imagine FDR and Churchill together on Christmas Eve, 1941? And they both gave a lecture, but what FDR talked about was we don't need to arm ourselves to prepare for war. We need to arm our hearts. And I would suggest to you, Eric, that there is a way to arm our hearts around the truth that is inherent in the Hebrew Scriptures and in the New Testament that will bring us back to the place that I believe we have been, and that is as a welcoming nation and a place where we understand that the brotherhood of humanity is something that's shared by all. And Jesus, of course, is at the heart of the New Testament, but when he was asked, who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor? He, of course, used the example of the pariah of his own culture, to ensure that any followers of his teaching, when they were asked that same question, who is my neighbor? So let's take the person who is most hated in your culture and say that is your neighbor, and that is the one that you won't ask questions about their heritage or their background or their religious faith. You will see someone in need and meet that need. So while I wish I could dispel those concerns immediately, Eric, I do believe that a return to biblical values in the right fashion, it's not an attempt to proselytize or coerce, but instead to enlighten, is a return that could be absolutely striking and powerful in positive ways for our nation.
As we try to think about what makes America exceptional, obviously the idea of religious freedom is central to the American project. They can't hear me?
Just get closer to the mic.
You hear me now? Okay. As we try to think about what makes America exceptional, obviously the idea of religious liberty is central to our project as a people. Carlos just introduced the well-known ideas of free exercise, that America is a nation that allows for the free expression of religious life, the idea of non-establishment, that it also doesn't allow for the government establishment of religious tests for office and other forms of coerced religion. And you've introduced the idea of America as a covenantal nation. These are three different ideas. What is most foundational to America? Are we the free exercise nation, the non-establishment nation, or the covenantal nation?
So I think we are the covenantal nation, and free exercise, rightly understood, lies at the very heart of what America seeks to be as a covenantal nation. Let me briefly explain what I mean by that. What is unique about the American vision and version of religious liberty as compared to, say, religious liberty in Europe as it emerged in the Enlightenment or in the emancipation of the Jews? The difference lies first and foremost with what the founders sought to bring about. What they sought to create was a society in which everyone is equal and no one is required, and this is the critical part, to amputate their religious identity from themselves in entering civic society. So there was a description, there was a reference to, Paul referenced the ratification of the Constitution. The Constitution was drafted in 1787. When the Jews wrote to George Washington to celebrate the Constitution and gave Washington the phrase that Washington cited, bigotry, a government that gives bigotry no sanction, persecution no assistance. What were they talking about there? They weren't talking about the First Amendment. There was no First Amendment. That's why it's an amendment, because it was put on later. What they were struck by was the fact that the Constitution, and we have to reflect on how incredible this is. Those in the Constitutional Convention just put this in there without debate. They put in Article 6, a clause that there shall be no religious test for any public office in the United States. No country had this, and no other country would have this for almost 100 years. When we talk about America as the land of opportunity, we don't mean first and foremost just economic opportunity. If you look at early America and you compare the Jews of early America, the Jews of my community, the oldest Jewish congregation in the United States. I don't like to talk about that, but I try to keep that under wraps. But the Jews in London, Jews like Moses Montefiore or the Rothschilds, achieved success far beyond the Jews of early America. But they didn't have equality. When one of the Rothschilds was elected to Parliament, Parliament wouldn't seat him for 10 years. So this is what was offered to the Jews, the ability to be equals, to be equally part of the American project, but without removing their religious identity from themselves. So that was different than Britain, where they were tolerated. That's what Washington means when he says, it is no longer toleration that is spoken of. And it's different than France after the Revolution, in which, as in France today, what is created is a wholly secular public square, devoid of faith at all, so that it's expected that you will remove your cross or your yarmulke. That's not what the founders created. So just to explain, to give one example to this, and in Philadelphia, when a parade was held in 1788 to celebrate the ratification of the Constitution by Pennsylvania, we have two eyewitness accounts. First is by Benjamin Rush, the most prominent physician of Philadelphia. And he described the clergy of the city walking in the parade to show, by his words, the relationship between religion and good government. Okay, that's unthinkable in post-revolutionary France. But he was struck by seeing in the parade the rabbi of the Jews and the ministers of the gospel walking arm in arm. Benjamin Rush said that this is a most delightful sight. There can be no greater symbol of this new constitution, which holds open its offices not only to all Christians, but to men of all religion. That's what Benjamin Rush wrote. The other eyewitness account we have is of a teenager who was there, a Jewish boy, Naphtali Phillips, who wrote this recollection after the Civil War when he was 96 years old. And he described how after this parade took place, everybody decamped to the town square where there was a smorgasbord, for a civic party. And he writes, with a special table for the Jews who were unable to partake of the food of the other parties. A kosher table in 1788. You can't imagine that in London in 1888. And so this is what I mean when it says what America offers to us is the ability to be both fully American and fully Jewish. Whether Jews in America seize that opportunity is a separate question. But that is what America has given us. And so we are a covenantal people because a covenant in America allows people of difference to come together around a creed without asking each other to actually do away with what makes us different.
Just a brief question for you, and then Carlos, eager for you to weigh in. Does this mean that Jews and Christians have a different place in the American experience than people outside the biblical covenant?
Yeah. So my view on that is that on the one hand, no, right? So to quote the minister from The Simpsons, Reverend Lovejoy, short answer, yes with a but, long answer, no with an if. What I mean by that is, first of all, of course, no. Because in a covenantal nation, embracing the creed allows people of all backgrounds and faiths to unite. Abraham Lincoln, speaking on July 4th, 1858, spoke famously about how there are many people in America today that do not descend from those that fought in the Revolution. And he said, and if they look back to finding a blood relationship to those who fought, they will find they have none. But, Lincoln said, when they look back to that old Declaration of Independence and they embrace the words that those old men wrote, that all men are created equal, then they will feel that they are the blood of the blood and flesh of the flesh of those figures. And so they are. This, Lincoln said, is the electric cord that unites all freedom-loving men and women. So everyone can embrace the American covenant, whether they are Jew or Christian, or whether they are entirely different faith or background. And that's the answer, full stop. I will say, though, building on what Carlos said, that ultimately there is no true great defense of the American idea that all men are created equal, shorn of the notion that man and woman are created in the image of God. Without that, there is no real defense. Stephen Carter, a professor at Yale Law School, wrote a book, Civility, about how we're not civil anymore to each other. And he wrote about a Jewish woman that embraced him and his family, a black family that moved into an all-white neighborhood. And he describes how the biblical teachings motivated this woman that greeted his family. And he ends up writing, and he's not a conservative. He's not a right-winger. He wrote, biblical faith provides a defense of democratic equality that liberalism avows but ultimately cannot defend. And so that's what I think when I say that if Jews and Christians have a special place, it's not that they're more American than anyone else, but I do believe that the biblical faith they embrace offers the best defense of the equality that is at the heart of the American covenant.
So Carlos, Rabbi Soloveichik's contention is that at the heart of the American idea is a Jewish idea.
I like to take credit for everything, for the Jews, pretty much.
But the foundational creed of America is that all men and women are created equal, and that equality is incoherent without the biblical creator. Do you buy that formulation?
I do. I think when you look even at Jefferson's first draft of the Declaration, it did not include the word creator with a capital C. And so it was in the wisdom of many that he made that edit. And I think even in my New Testament example, I think part of what I'm trying to convey is that there is a thematic unity between the Hebrew scriptures and the New Testament that both support exactly what the rabbi has stated.
So, Carlos, I'll start with you. We've been thinking about our past, about the foundational ideas that gave life to the American project. Let's spend a little time on the present, because there's certainly things afoot in the present in our culture that are stark and worrisome. It seems to me that at the heart of the DNA of America has always been, not just, as Rabbi Soloveichik said, a toleration of Jews and all peoples, but a kind of embrace of the Jews as a people. Never until recently did I worry that there could be a real turn against the Jews in America. We've seen it for a while on the political left. Now there are those of us who are looking at what's going on in the political, including the Christian right, with some concern. What do you think is going on today? How worried are you, and how do we stand against this rising tide of anti-Semitic sentiment?
Well, I am worried. I am. I think we need to be worried and diligent and confrontive of what seems to be incredibly sudden. It was not many years ago when the governor of the state where I was serving as president of a university sent a letter to every university president and said anti-Semitism is on the rise in the state of Ohio, in this case, and it is being fomented on your campuses. So what will you do to counteract this reality? I'm grateful that we had support on our campus to bring scholars from Yad Vashem to our campus to teach our education students in particular. They lectured the entire campus, but we felt it was critical for the people who were training to be teachers in America to know more, not just about the Shoah, but to know more about the roots of anti-Semitism and what is it that we share as a people. I would like to say that all of my fellow presidents in the state took like action, but that's not the case. And so I am concerned. I think in some ways the Christian right has become an oxymoron for me. And I say that because when I see and hear some of what's coming from what others would call the alt-right and others, it is shocking. And it seems to be a return to forgetting people that don't understand that we will repeat the tragedies of the past if we allow and countenance this kind of talk. That's what is most difficult for me. And when I hear people who are close to me say that we will never back away from our friendship with an individual, that's troubling to me. When I hear someone say, we will never back away from our commitment to the Jewish people as a nation, that is not troubling to me. That reinforces something to me. And I will say, just quickly to close, Eric, that if we segmented the Christian population in the US and we divided them, let's just say, in people who are closer to my age, I don't believe that there has been much of a waning at all in our overall support for the Jewish state and the Jewish people and the Jewish faith. I do believe that there has been such horror and propaganda, and I say this with due respect, but I was in the room meeting with the Israel Antiquities Authority, a group that we have a terrific relationship, you might guess, at Museum of the Bible. But the executive director of the Antiquities Authority could not be with us because he was delivering food. Literally, he was on a truck delivering food in Gaza. And what he said to me was, Carlos, everything you're seeing and reading is a lie. I'm here. People are not starving. And this is just one example. You know what I'm getting at there. But you know how this seemed to have turned almost overnight, Eric, this deep belief and this conflation, right? So the conflation is with the current Israeli government, with which especially the youth in America have taken great issue with, college students in particular. So many of them, I would suggest, almost mindlessly following, but real enough, conflating these two. I do believe that if you segment the population, you would see not much change, but I am very worried when someone like a Nick Fuentes and even this Tate character, because they are advocating a hatred and a disregard for humanity and a bigotry that is so open and blatant that while I know that in America they should have the right to speak, they should not be countenanced when they do.
Can I just push this a little further, Carlos? Why do you think these perverse characters are getting a hearing today among young Americans, including among young Christians? What is going on?
Well, I think there are a number of things. I think we as a people have been subjugated to the power of this instrument that's in my pocket right now. And somehow the number of likes you have and the number of followers, God help us, we all have followers, but that these men have any followers is truly a horror to me. But the idea being, if 9 million people follow you, you must have something to say. Truly, that's as shallow as it gets in terms of why people are following them. I think provocateurs have always been interesting to a certain segment of our population. What I think is paralyzing is that we have failed to educate our young people so that they would not see these charlatans for who they are. Not charlatans. These are amoral brutes. And they should be seen for that, called out for that, and demonized for who they are. But I think that's part and parcel to what's happening.
So, Rabbi Soloveichik, please. Two questions, though, I think in the end they're deeply related. Can we make sense of anti-Semitism without understanding what makes the Jewish people exceptional? And how do Jews stand against anti-Semitism without succumbing to the pathology of thinking like victims?
Yeah. So I do think that anti-Semitism is linked to the exceptional nature of the Jewish story. And rightly understood, all that is wrapped up with in America now, with the exceptional nature of the American story. So let me briefly explain what I mean. It is, of course, true that anti-Semitism is un-American, and we are a country that is meant to give to bigotry no sanction, persecution, no assistance. But in the explosion of anti-Semitism now, I think we're seeing something much deeper and about much more than the Jews. Much more than the Jews. Michael wonderfully referenced the letter that George Washington wrote to the Jews of Newport, which is the great watchword of American equality. And of course, which ends in his blessing to the Jews, that he blesses that the children of the stock of Abraham shall dwell safely in this land, where each shall live under their own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make them afraid. And of course, now we are in a time where many Jewish Americans are afraid. But that, of course, was not Washington's first letter to the Jews. It was his second letter. Because when Washington was elected president, the different minority faith communities in America each got together and sent Washington a letter. All the Catholics in America sent Washington a letter. All the Quakers in America sent Washington a letter. All the Baptists in America sent Washington a letter. And the Jews in America could not agree who would send the letter. So they sent him 3 letters. Washington, was probably wondering why these Michiganers keep sending me letters. But he wrote back to each one, and thank God, because each one is its own gem, and each one has something to teach us. So the Newport one is famous, because it is about equality. But the earlier one was written to the Jews of Savannah, and it actually highlights how the founders saw in the Jews an inspiration to their own covenantal character. So Washington receives this letter from the Jews of Savannah. He could have just written a nice thing, we're all equal. Washington knew that whatever he wrote would be publicized by the Jews because it was important to them, and also because the Jewish definition of a secret is something you only tell one person at a time. And so Washington wrote at the end a reference to the Exodus. And he said that, may the God who performed miracles for you in redeeming you from your Egyptian captors, what we're reading about in the Torah right now, whose providence has been so lately manifest in our own revolution, continue to bestow blessings upon them, meaning the Jews, and allow all denominations to partake in the spiritual blessings of that people whose God is. And then Washington concluded with God's Hebrew name that Jews don't pronounce. George Washington wrote that in summer of 1790. And what he's saying is that we see in your story a story that inspires the exceptional way in which we see ourselves. So why is that important to what's happening right now? It's important because actually the hatred of the Jews that we are seeing, both on the progressive woke left and on the now called woke right, is not really only about the Jews. There is a reason why those that are perpetuating this hatred also ultimately perpetuate a hatred of America, of the exceptional nature of the United States. Have you ever seen on a college quad in the past 2 years a pro-Hamas rally that is lovingly waving American flags? They're not saying, we love America, we just really hate Israel. No one's saying that. Of course they're not saying that. Because ultimately, the woke left is driven by, as embodied most famously in the 1619 Project, a vision of America in which America's very founding was evil. That instead of it being a country that, as Paul described, is an exceptional country that certainly did not always hew to its covenant, but hewed in its arc toward good and toward an exceptional story. That's not how they see the story of America. And deep down, the Jews are an avatar for the exceptional aspect of the American story, because deep down they know that the Jews are bound up with the exceptional way that America has seen itself. And that's true on the woke right as well. When Tucker Carlson is not talking about the Jews, which is only around 5% of the time at this point, but when he's not talking about the Jews, he's talking about America's ills. He's talking about how Western civilization is a problem. He's bringing on guests that when they're not talking about how all Jews were immune to COVID, they're talking about how Winston Churchill was the villain of World War II. Or as Rebecca Heinrichs put it, if the woke left has the 1619 Project, the woke right has the 1939 Project. A belief that this great moment that we are discussing today, the American liberation of Europe and the liberation of the camps, is actually, in their view, where America went wrong. And they feel the Jews are bound up with that. And so what we need to do as Jews is to make the case that this is actually about much more than us. That's the key. In the end, it's not just about us. It's the very future of America that is at stake.
So, Carlos, it seems clear that the long-term struggle for American civilization is going to take place one classroom at a time. It's a struggle for the soul and the spirit and the direction of our schools. The geniuses at the New York Times who had created the 1619 Project understood that. So what can we do to try to bring these covenantal ideas back into American education? And do you think the public school model has shown itself as a kind of failure precisely because its DNA is to write the Bible out of American education?
These simple questions he keeps lobbing at me. I'd like you, Eric, to please reframe that question in the form of an answer. Is that, yeah? Well, let me just dig into that a little because it is such a complex issue. Let me just say a few things that come to mind. We have failed in the public system, but I want to quickly put a proviso in there. It isn't a complete failure. And here's my concern. So many people, Christians and Jews and people of no faith, are telling me public schools are a place of wreckage. I've pulled my child out. I'm homeschooling my child, and I will never, not only never have my child in public school, but they demonize public education. That's concerning to me on a number of fronts. One, public education. Now, who would that be? Is that not us? Are your tax dollars not being spent the way mine are? Of course they are. This is our system. And to completely abandon it and say, let it burn, to me is not the answer. And I will also tell you, as a Latino, many Latinos in this country do not have access to private education. And even with vouchers and other things that states are doing, some states are doing, they are consigned to public education. So this will take decades, and it is one classroom at a time. And my hope is that there are some lights on the horizon, including this return to classic education. Classical education, that model isn't perfect, but what an upgrade. Listen to Michael. Michael, at the very basic level, all he does is puts out a report card and says, do you require your students to take these courses? That's all he's asking. He doesn't talk about content so much, right? He's not out there saying, you've got to then teach these 8 metrics. Let's just start with, can you imagine that we have to form an alliance that would require the teaching of American history in our own nation? I mean, it's stunning. I say these things as though I'm surprised by them. So it will take time, but here's part of what I would say is a plea to this group and more broadly, Eric, and that is let's not abandon public education, but bring those reforms that are necessary because, you know, this whole idea being the worry is that biblical education means proselytizing education is such a lie. If it's done effectively, it's not that at all. What child is harmed by thou shalt not murder? For gracious sakes. How is it possible that the 10 Commandments are a threat to any human being on earth? They are water to our souls if we'll only avail ourselves of them. So you can tell I'm not passionate at all about these things, but I'll sit back and take a sip off of the rabbi's flask and see if I can relax for a moment.
So
You can have one of my flasks, Carlos.
Rabbi Soloveichik, following up on this, how do you explain to someone that Jewish day schools or Christian day schools are better nurseries of American citizenship than public schools?
I mean, what do you mean? How do I explain to somebody? And you just...
How do you make that case? As opposed to an argument that got a lot of weight earlier in American history, that parochial schools were a threat to the American project, and what we needed were public schools that assimilated Americans to Americanism.
So I think on the one hand, we do have to recognize that there was bigotry affiliated with those that opposed parochial schools in the past. That is important to recognize. We also should recognize the greatness of what public education once achieved in America. It would be wrong to discount that. My family grew up with the Little House books by Laura Ingalls Wilder. I was actually just quoting it to my... do you guys read that when you were growing up? Yeah, so I was just quoting it because, of course, one of our favorite books is The Long Winter, about the 7 months of winter. And I did reference it to my wife. I may have compared Alamanza Wilder going out in a 40-mile sled ride to find food for the town to my going 5 blocks to the bagel store during the blizzard. Those were equally heroic. But there's a scene in the book Little Town on the Prairie, which is the penultimate book in the series, if you don't count the first 4 years, which is depressing, and I don't count it as part of the series. And they were a town, DeSmet, South Dakota, where, they don't have much by way of entertainment. And so they decided to put together a literary society, okay? Not everything that they did in this literary society, some of it was, as to use the modern term, problematic. But they had, this was their idea of entertainment one time, was that they chose Laura Ingalls, who was 14 or 15, and her friend Ida Brown, who I think was like a first cousin of John Brown, I think. And their job was just to tell together the entire history of the United States from 1492 to 1880. And Laura's job was to basically tell through like Andrew Jackson from Columbus. This a 14-year-old would do. And this was in DeSmet, South Dakota in the 1880s. Now, obviously, she was very talented, and she's brighter than some of the other students. Not everyone was given this. But it wasn't that they could say, okay, here's money for everybody, start 8 different parochial schools in DeSmet, South Dakota. This was a schoolroom with 8 people. And sometimes this is how a great deal of America was educated. And so we can't discount that. We have to recognize that. But we also have to recognize that a terrible rupture has occurred. Many parents who saw what their schools were teaching on Zoom during COVID finally saw that. But of course, that's not just true for public schools. They saw that as parents of Dalton as well. There is a rupture in education and in what we are teaching our children, period. Period. And if we can show schools, if we can show parents that we can create Jewish and Christian schools that educate for their children to be better citizens, not just better Christians and Jews, but better citizens, then we will have a claim on the future of American education. This is a large and heterogeneous country. And we are also in a federalist system, laboratories of democracy. And you will find places like the Mississippi Miracle, right, where things are happening in education in the public sphere. Things are happening in Texas now. But you will also find extraordinary things achieved in Christian schools and in Jewish schools. And in that respect, we need many flowers to bloom.
So, for the last part of this discussion, I'd like to take up more directly the question of Jews and Christians. And Rabbi Soloveichik, I'll start with you. Why do you think Jews in general have done a pretty poor job in cultivating friendship, cultivating a kind of moral and civilizational and political alliance with Christians, and not in a utilitarian way, but in a deeper way? Why have Jews failed? Will the Jews change? And at a deeper level, as a Jewish thinker, how do you think about the meaning of Christianity?
I see we've reached the anti-Semitic portion of our program. I think we need to begin because we were speaking about the problems we face. By we, I mean Jews in America. I think we need to recognize the extraordinary nature of the moment in which we find ourselves. Antonin Scalia, the late justice, has an amazing speech that he gave, first at his child's graduation and then later at his grandchild's graduation. And the point of the speech was that he just went through platitudes that are often said at graduation which are not true. So one is, to quote Hamlet, "To thine own self be true," right? Which was said by Polonius, who's an idiot. And as Scalia said, "To thine own self be true" is either very good or very bad advice, depending on who exactly you think you are. So Scalia said one of the most overused phrases at a graduation, at a commencement is, "We live in unprecedented times." Because of course, if you believe we live in unprecedented times, then we have nothing to learn from history. And Scalia, I think, said something like, probably at the graduation of Troy High School during the Trojan War, the speaker got up and said, "We live in unprecedented times." But he said, most challenges that face us are either threats through war, threats of man, threats of nature. Those are the challenges we face. And they may take one form or another form, but the challenges are to some extent the same. So when it comes to hatred of the Jews, you can't say we live in unprecedented times. But here's what we can say, where as Jews we genuinely live in unprecedented times. There are millions of non-Jews that care about us. There are millions of Americans that care about us. I've met them in my travels. I wear a yarmulke, right? So if you wear a yarmulke wherever you are, people are going to come over to you. I was actually in Indonesia, and I thought, should I wear my yarmulke? Then I thought, yeah, I'm here as part of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, so I'm here as an American, so I should wear my yarmulke. So I'm in the Park Hyatt of Jakarta, walking around in my yarmulke, and I was at the bar. I happened to be at the bar, and one of the waiters comes over to me, a nice woman, and she pats me on the shoulder, points to my yarmulke, and I'm already, and she says, "I really like your hat." And it was then that I realized she had no idea I was Jewish. She'd never seen a religious Jew before, But on a plane, I'll be on a United flight. Captain will come out to go to the bathroom. I'm standing in the aisle. He'll see my yarmulke. He'll say, "I'm a Christian. I live in X state. God bless the Jewish people. God bless the Jewish state." It's happened to me. These are things I've experienced. On a flight to Australia, United captain coming over to me and say this to me. And so Jews have made mistakes because they are wary of many things, but I think they think about the history of anti-Semitism. They think about the history of Christian anti-Semitism, and they are wary. And that has led to some mistakes. It's led to mistakes of some Jewish organizations in America thinking that allowing people of all faiths to reflect their faith in the public square is actually a threat to Jews. It's led to many Jews to think that a wholly secular public square is better for Jews. It's led to many Jews to think that pouring their own philanthropic donations directly into the Ivy League, directly, without any other focus, right, is going to be best for Jews, right? But what we have to recognize is we genuinely live in unprecedented times. This is the first time in Jewish history when there are more non-Jews than Jews in the world that care about the well-being of the Jewish people. That has never happened before. Never. Not in the times of David, not in the times of Solomon. I'm not just talking about people like Javier Milei, who will come to Davos and say things like, "I would like to say something from this week's Torah portion." I'm talking about millions of Christians. And the Jewish response to that has to be hakarat hatov. Hakarat hatov is gratitude. And if we haven't shown it enough in the past, we have to show it now. Because if we've learned anything now, it's that we can't take it for granted. And so that's, in that respect, I think we live in unprecedented times. And in this case, whether Jews rise to the occasion is up to us. That's what I think.
So, Carlos, Rabbi Soloveichik, I think, gave beautiful voice to the fact that many religious Christians love the Jewish people, love Israel, see us, as John Paul II famously put it, as the elder brothers in faith. Are you worried that's being lost? And how do you ensure that the Christian idea of Jews and Judaism remains strong, remains Hebraic, remains in sympathy with helping to renew this covenantal idea of America that began this conversation?
Well, you're not surprised that I'm going to focus on education, because there's still a thick veil between our faiths that is not artificial, but it should be removed. I think the reality is, and I say proudly at Museum of the Bible, though most of the people who walk in our doors identify themselves as Christian, the most popular exhibit at Museum of the Bible is the Hebrew Bible Experience, by far. But I will say this, that when I consider how little evangelical Christians truly know about the Jewish faith, and perhaps vice versa, I know one side much better than the other. The rabbi and I were talking, he said, we really should sit down and talk a little bit more. I'm really interested in Christian theology. And it's one of the things I'm proudest of that Eric and Rabbi Solly are dedicated to, and that is helping with the conversation. The leading evangelical preachers, I'll just say that, in America, I would suggest, believe that because they know the Hebrew scriptures well, and they do, because they believe that is in totality all of what it means to be a Jew, truly. And I know only enough to know how little that is true of the fullness of the Jewish faith and of the Jewish people. I heard someone say recently, we appreciate, as Jewish people and people of Jewish faith and tradition and heritage, we appreciate the Christian embrace, but sometimes we wonder if it is meant to love us or to suffocate us. Is it truly an embrace to supersede us, or is it an evangelical drive that is simply meant to convert us? And one of the things I would say is, while of course it may be true of some, and I'm sure this is my own very subjective impression, but I have been in those spaces, and it's not just toward Jewish people, it's toward any person. It's this idea of we're meant to love our enemies. Jewish people are certainly not that. That those who revile you, we're supposed to minister to. This is the call. And I have seen Christian people weep at the way these protests are happening on college campuses, on this new rise of anti-Semitism. Truly weep and say, God, what can I do to intervene on behalf of my Jewish brothers and sisters? Because what we believe at our depth is that we come from a common rootstock. We do. And of course there are differences in our belief. But we all understand that when Noah began building the ark, it was preceded by God saying the thoughts of mankind were only evil continually. I'm not sure what that says in the original language, but that English translation is daunting to me. And I say that because we know we don't have to read the heart of darkness to know that we are all fighting at some point our own natures. And to me, it's what is so precious about our faiths. It helps us to rise above those instincts that are our baser selves. And it leads to people saying, can you imagine it's a courageous act to wear a yarmulke? When I see students wearing the Star of David and they say, just putting this on, Dr. Campo, just wearing this puts me at risk in my classroom, in my community. I hope and pray, Eric, that we can truly, and I mean deeply, educate one another that we're not a threat, but instead we truly are brothers and sisters, and we can truly be civil at the heart of what civility is all about, that leads to a populace that we can all be proud of.
Well, I think there are very few places in the American public square, in the Jewish world, that could have a conversation like this. And I think it's a great credit to the Levys for envisioning this forum, to Palm Beach Synagogue, which has become such a special convening place on deep matters of soul and state, and to ACTA for organizing this with such seriousness that we could do this. So please join me in thanking Rabbi Soloveichik, Carlos Campo,